Parker. If you haven't heard of that name before, I'll be very surprised. He's a brand from the start of his career in 1971, working as a singer, comedian in bars throughout South Africa, to theatre tours of South Africa's premier venues, and to periodic appearances for expats in the UK. Joe has laid down an impressive career, which has almost become the workshop manual for young aspiring comedians in South Africa. Virtually all the comedians working in this country have passed through venues managed and owned by Joe, and most have been mentored by him along the way. He's the owner of the premier comedy club on the continent, Parker's Comedy and Jive in Montecasino, and provides regular work for approximately 130 working stand-up comics from this country and around the world. So I'd like to give an extremely warm welcome to Joe Parker. Hello, Joe.
Hey, guys.
All right, so let's just kick off from the start. Now, I want to ask you something pretty personal. You've been doing this for around 50 years, yeah?
Well, it'll be 50 years next year.
Wow. Okay, so 49 years. So
right.
You've heard just about all the jokes that there are.
Okay.
I mean, surely they're not coming up with new stuff anymore, or don't they just regurgitate the old ones and change the way that they're designed?
Well, they use there's a whole lot of formatting in comedy which people use to take current situations and plop them in.
Okay, so I pretty much bet that if I come up with something, you would be able to probably give me the punchline. So let's
have a bash.
Folk, I promise you, Joe doesn't know what I'm going to come up with now. Let's just see if he can. Okay. So when I was 17 at school, I used to grab the newspaper as soon as it arrived when I got home. And there was the story. So I was 17 years old. There was a story about a 17-year-old woman who'd got engaged to a 71-year-old guy. So the reporter came along, he was let in, and the reporter said, look, do you mind if I get, and he's talking to the 71-year-old, he says, do you mind if I get straight to the point? You're 71 and your fiance is 17. What about the age gap? What's the punchline?
If she dies, she dies.
Now, how's that? Joe did not know what I was going to come up with now. I primed him that I was going to come up with something, but I didn't tell him what it was. Now, case in point, if she dies, she dies. Brilliant.
Yeah.
No, fantastic.
You see the underlying concept there is the age difference.
Yes.
That's what it is. And you can reverse the genders as well. It's even funnier if it's a 71-year-old woman and a 17-year-old guy.
Yeah. So it's almost as if there's a certain amount of formula that you can use in comedy.
Oh, yeah. Yes, there is. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So why use humor in a presentation?
Okay. Let me start off by quoting one of the most iconic entertainers in the history of music and entertainment, or music and comedy. Victor Borge once said, the shortest distance between two people is a smile. And we all know that when people smile, it breaks down all sorts of formality. So humor is a fantastic way of breaking that down. And of course, people are a lot more receptive when they're relaxed.
Yeah.
Humor creates a sense of community. Yeah, there's subliminal bonding between people. And humor, and when you smile, you feel safe. When you're laughing, you feel really safe. So you are creating incredible bonds with people. Most of them you don't really know terribly well.
And Joe, almost making them relax and just feel better about themselves and happy.
Absolutely. And, with me being involved in stand-up comedy where people actually pay to come for my product, you're knitting together the most diverse people. They're laughing often because other people are laughing.
So I'm just going to ask you, you mentioned the name Victor Borge. And he's really one of the absolute classic old style comedians. I was lucky enough to meet him when I was 13 years old. I was part of the Drakensberg Boys Choir, and we were all at the Nickermilan Opera House. We were going to perform just after Victor Borge, and he invited us on stage on his last performance. And we all stood there in these little blue tunics with bibs on and what have you. And he walked on stage and he had a line for that. He just looked at us and he said, "What?" He said, "Are you twins?" That was
Well, there you go. There you go.
amazing. Absolutely amazing. So what can I do if I'm not a naturally funny person? How can I bring a little bit of light-heartedness into my presentation, whether it's live on stage or virtual like now?
I think, you know, you really have to know who you are. You've got to really know who you are as a human being and what are the things that make you laugh. For me, all these years I've been doing stand-up comedy, the comedy that I've been most attracted to has been the comedy that's made me laugh. So it's easy enough to construct a story around events that are happening politically in South Africa because you're taking facts and then you're using formats to actually present it. But if you're not that naturally funny person or a stand-up comedian, it's useful to know your own sense of humor. What is it that that makes me laugh? And a lot of people won't do it because they're really worried about what the response will be.
Yeah.
People are, first of all, very scared to get up and say or even speak on a microphone, but let alone say something which they expect to get a laugh or a response to, and they get nothing. So people are fearful of doing that because they don't think that they are funny enough.
Yeah.
And it's because we tend to compare ourselves with the last comedian we saw.
Joe, we need to find our own rhythm in terms of not putting too much pressure on ourselves to be funny, but just let it, in a sense, almost come naturally.
Sorry, not everybody is that superstar comedian. We're not all going to be able to do that.
No.
However, in a serious presentation, which I think part of what we're talking about is virtual presenting, is the humor doesn't have to be, show-stopping. It really has to be witty and amusing. And if you don't think you've got enough of that, there's loads of stuff online. You can research quotes, and there's some incredibly funny quotes.
Yeah.
And anecdotes, which you can use them as long as you obviously acknowledge whoever wrote the stuff, and people don't mind. They really don't mind that it's not yours. But I think it's very important because it keeps people's attention. It really does, because when you smile, you relax and you enjoy, like we've said, you become connected.
Absolutely. Now, there's a comment here from a fellow de Toit, Piet, who says that my sense of humor is quite dry, and from the far side, people tend to miss it over their heads. And that's an interesting case in point, because sometimes when you're using humor, you just need to pick the audience you're going to use that kind of dry humor on, because sometimes they don't get it.
Well, there's a part of my humor which I know for a fact only really appeals to a certain percentage of, let's say, any given audience. But I know that if I'm actually connecting with those few people, that is enhancing my presentation. And eventually they hear other people laugh, and then they wonder, what did I miss? And then they get used to looking for the comedy. People in stand-up comedy audiences come there, and they're getting educated all the time on techniques and the sort of things people laugh at. So their own sense of humor becomes more and more sophisticated.
Yeah, I remember listening to Kenny Harris, the late Kenny Harris in the UK, with his broad Scottish accent, and because I wasn't in tune with all the stuff that is happening in the UK, I couldn't understand some of the humor, but it was still one of the best comedy acts that I'd ever seen, just because of the way he put the message across sometimes. So I got about 70% of the jokes, but even the ones that I didn't get, I still found funny just because of the delivery.
Right. And was that a stand-up comedy routine that you watched?
It was a 33-minute routine at after dinner at the PSA Awards in Brighton in 2005, and I've just never forgotten it. It was just so funny.
And you were there, were you?
In the audience, yeah.
Okay, so that's another very interesting thing, is that when you're doing stand-up comedy, or you're doing comedy in this type of environment, I mean, I can see people. The problem is that you don't hear, first of all, I know we all muted, but you don't get the same response as if there's a live audience.
Yeah. So in a sense, we've got to just come to terms with the fact that it is tougher doing it remotely, But perhaps if we have humor that has worked previously on audiences, it's a pretty good idea to try it again, because the chances are it'll work again.
Yeah, and if you like you said there that you're a bit sort of left field, that's okay, because if you are able to put that into your presentation and it only appeals to 5 or 10% of the people, you're making your mark. You really are making your mark. The people that don't get it, it's okay. I think a lot of people are worried that the comedy that they think is so funny doesn't get through.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
And you know, we're not really only just talking about comedy, we're talking generally about audience response. I had a 3-hour seminar that I once delivered in Northern Natal, and the guy sitting right in the middle in front of me sat like this without smiling for the entire 3 hours, except when I said something really funny and the corner of his mouth went. And right at the end, I just thought, let me look somewhere else. I'm not going to get this guy. And he was the one that stood up in the end and thanked me for the speech on behalf of the rest of the community. I don't know how he appointed himself, but you just never know. Some people laugh silently.
Yes, and also it's just quite. I remember one evening in the old Cape Sun in the middle of Johannesburg, there was a Wesbank. Wesbank put on an evening for all the motor dealers. And I hadn't actually worked that out, because of what I did my set. And, you know, the thing about doing stand-up comedy is that when it's not working, you panic a bit and then you speed up a little bit. And I finished up doing about an hour and I'd had hardly any response. And then right at the end, there was just this huge outpouring of laughter and clapping and all that. And then I realized is that because everyone was so competitive, that the guy from Ford or General Motors or whatever, they didn't want to be seen to be having too much fun, because, you know, the egos are big, and, you know, just they didn't really commit. So that's a problem sometimes.
Yeah. Now, Claire asks an interesting question. She says, do you need to change your humor for the audience, even though it's not the kind of thing that you yourself find funny?
In live stand-up comedy, there's a few things. There are some things you need to remember. That is, of course, first of all, your audience, and I think that happens quite a bit on virtual conferencing. Your audience gets a sort of herd identity. They kind of, because of what you're saying and what you're doing, they kind of come into your world, and it's almost like they follow the energy of the room. So the laughter is big, more people get involved. The laughter is small, not as many people get involved. So get this kind of identity altogether. So, you know, the laughter thing is so important, because you've got to know about culture.
Yeah.
Language is important. In this country, certainly public mores, what people find acceptable to joke about and not. As I said, culture, history, contemporary history, what's going on in the country at that particular time. But I think, like for me, because I've been doing it such a long time, I can work that out in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Just by the opening statements, and you look at people, you see what they're wearing. Body language is a big giveaway, and that helps you knit this herd together, for want of a better word.
So one of the interesting things that you're really getting at here is that if you're really going to get them on your side and let them know that your stuff is fresh, it's to bring in some fresh humor about stuff that's happening kind of now, if not this year, but maybe in the last week or the last day or so.
Yeah, like you said, you know, that there's a whole lot of formats that you can plop sort of current events into to make them seem really fresh and up to date. And a lot of the up to date stuff is you know, stuff that people have heard or maybe even seen on the internet, and or people have picked up from one of your previous presentations, and they know the joke, but what happens is they relate to it because they're seeing somebody present it back to them in a way that is real and present.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I remember the times 15 years ago when tweeting was for the birds, but now even the President of the United States is doing it.
Tweeting was for the birds. There you go.
Did that work?
Well, for me it did, because I was, you know, I've got my comedy radar on all the time.
Okay, so there's a question here from Tinas. He says, which topics should one stay away from?
Well, I think there's no hard rules about this, because some of the best comics I've watched have been able to say the most outrageous things and make it sound like just a casual conversation.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's clever. That's really, really clever, because really, I think all of us have there's certain areas in our lives and the things that we find acceptable that we're going to be sensitive about. But, you know, you cannot, if you had to take everybody into consideration, you'd be wasting your time getting on stage, because nobody would laugh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you are going to offend somebody, certainly in my genre, by getting on stage and talking about some of the things that we would need to laugh about in the world. They're going to upset people. People are going to be offended.
Yeah. So sometimes, in a sense, you need to take your chances.
All the time. For me, I've always done that. Not because it was something I set out to do. It was something that I challenged myself. How can I get this audience to respond in the most vibrant, energetic way?
Yeah.
And so you are going to stand on toes.
Joe, there's some interest in the different comedy formats, or maybe some of the ways that you can create humor out of nothing. Are you willing to share some of the ones that we could practically maybe put into use?
Well, okay. Well, like I said, you know, if you do a bit of, you know, watch a few other people who present, do a bit of research, and find out. I think it's most important to find out what is it that makes you laugh, because if you're relaxed with the content, it's so much easier to present that. So, you know, if there's certain things that make you laugh, and you might think, well, I haven't got a sense of humor. Oh, yes, you have, because there are things that will make you laugh. And then to drill down into those, you know, those things that have made you laugh, and do a little bit of research, get a hold of some stuff, go onto YouTube. There's loads and loads of stuff of amusing speakers. I'm sure there's not enough stuff of enough material of guys who do virtual presenting to show how you can break that barrier.
Yeah.
But really, you know, if you can't find your own funny, there's loads and loads of resource online. And anecdotes, people telling funny stories, and they're funny. It doesn't matter what circumstances that they're presented in. You know, funny is funny. You know, people will laugh.
Absolutely. And some people develop a very, very distinctive brand. Pieter's just put in the chat box John Cleese as an example. Yeah. Okay. So the similarities or comparisons between stand-up comedy and public speaking, how do they kind of fit together? How do they complement each other?
Oh, okay. Well, stand-up comedy, like I just said, doesn't work and really work unless it's live. Okay. Whereas virtual presenting, Bob, you know, is certainly the way it's going a lot for speakers today. Although, you know, I was speaking to Steph right at the beginning, or Steph Duplessis at the beginning of his webinars, and he was concerned about the fact that because of lockdown, that doing public speaking is going to kind of fade out, and people will rather be sitting at home or sitting watching on a computer. I don't believe that's going to happen at all. I believe that going forward, like with comedy, virtual presenting alongside doing live work, maybe to smaller audiences, is going to be the way it goes until we get past this pandemic that we're faced with.
And I was standing in front of 250 principals, all sitting in a hotel conference center, trying to motivate and energize them on a project that a Ministry of Education wanted to deploy in their country. And they had to, of course, be on board and invested so that this could be a success. And it was just, I'm not a comedian. You know, I'm a technical person. I own a software company, and explain to them the benefits and the results and their involvement and what. I was speaking to people with masks. And at the end of the day, I said to them, may I just have a show of hands of how many of you are married? And all the hands went up, of course. It just came off the cuff. It came from just inside my heart. I said, so you sold yourself very effectively as a salesperson to your spouse. And if you could do that, you could sell this to your staff.
Bravo. That's brilliant.
Very funny.
Joe, one of the things that I found is that when I tried out something that didn't work, I'd pause and I'd simply say, well, they found that funny in Bloemfontein, and then that would get the laugh.
Very funny, because if you said that they found that funny in Bloemfontein, it's a bit of a diss to your audience, because it means that even perhaps people who don't get exposed to a lot of comedy got that. Yeah.
So I actually, unfortunately, said that once in Bloemfontein. I got chased out of the hotel.
Another way, there's a nice thing about self-effacing humor. So, if a joke doesn't laugh, you pause and then you say, well, okay, I will take that one out of my presentation for next time. And it makes people think about it.
Yeah.
But, the thing about humor is that, for me, it lubricates the passage of your message to a deeper level in somebody. Because I think when people they like you, or they've got this kind of connection with you, they're far more receptive. And I really think that it makes your presentation memorable, and people will remember you, and probably, this will increase the number of bookings you get. If people remember Paul du Toit, and they might not remember Paul necessarily for your whole message, but they'll remember you as a very charming presenter and a very effective speaker.
So, Joe, what have you learned during lockdown about your own craft that could be of value to virtual speakers in the future?
Well, first of all, don't panic about your speaking career. I really don't think you should, because, I think human nature relies on contact with other human beings. So from our perspective, definitely stand-up comedy doesn't work on a television screen in this way. A live performance streamed might work, but I think both of our industries are going to need to have a component of live streaming as well as live presentation to, at least for the short to medium term future, purely from a point of view of what's going on internationally from this pandemic point of view.
Well, I know certainly I can't wait to get out again and to come out to your club and have a good laugh. I've been there a number of times and it's been absolutely wonderful. The whole vibe, the whole way that it's set up. Joe, can you just tell us a little bit? There will be a few people here that haven't been to your club in Monte Casino, Parker's Comedy and Jive. Can you just tell us a little bit about us and how we can book if we want to go, and how we can access the programming?
Okay, so we unfortunately not even on level 1 as yet, but I do think that as more and more information around coronavirus becomes available, that those terms and conditions and regulations are going to change. So what I think will happen is that certainly once we open up, or know we're going to open, we'll put a notice up on our website. We will obviously get that out to the public as quickly as possible. And the sense I get is that we'll be able to open with a limited audience. We're looking at ways of live streaming the shows, and letting people pay maybe a reduced fee because they're not there. And you'd be able to go straight to our website, parkerscomedy.com. And as soon as we're up and running, then people will be able to book online.
Absolutely amazing. And have you got any last parting shots for us before we close things down in about a minute or two?
Well, I've learned that there's an intrinsic value about laughter, which I really miss now. I miss, I can sit and watch stuff on YouTube and it's been a lot of fun, but I miss being with people and sharing and laughing. And it's amazing the bridges that are built and the connections you make with people are not as apparent, for argument's sake, as just a smile, or just a greeting with a bit of a giggle and a laugh. So that, I think, is what we're really missing, certainly in our lives now. And I honestly believe it's not going to be long before we're going to be able to take full advantage of certainly what we do.
Yeah, and I think just that, excuse me, that sense of being together and laughing together is almost infectious. It just creates a mood and an atmosphere that is possibly difficult to reproduce in a virtual situation. But I think the message you've really given us, Joe, is that it's not impossible to pull off humor on a virtual basis. And you've in a sense just got to trust yourself and not be too self-conscious about trying to please everyone.
Yeah, I think the people that, most people are terrified of public speaking, but I mean, by virtue of this forum, you are public, most of you are presenters or public speakers, keynote speakers. And so when we talk about humor, the telling a joke or being witty or funny as a public speaker is probably that small area of fear that most people have. Even, I've got friends of mine who are really funny around the bra, but couldn't stand on the stage and do it. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So it's the same, perhaps, is that, like Marianne said there, the first thing she said was, well, I'm not a stand-up comedian. Well, you made us laugh with an anecdote. Now, that's what I mean, is that's funny. And that's the sort of thing that's going to, people will remember you probably as much for the fact that you are an accessible human being with a sense of humor as they will for the message that you put across.